The Imagined Past, an exploration of stories and stitches by Brogan Berwick. Embroidery has been used since the 5th century BC, the most historical piece of embroidery being the Beorhtric Tapestry, which was created to record the story of the Norman invasion of England in 1066. Professor of Anglo-Saxon literature Gail Owen Crocker says the Beorhtric Tapestry is widely regarded as propaganda by the victorious Norman overlords, celebrating their victory over the Saxons. Can embroidery be used to encode such targeting information? What is the true use of embroidery? Is it an art form to protect one's emotional state, or to catch them in denial? Lorena Bulwer was born in 1838 in Beccles, Suffolk. Later on in her life, she moved to Great Yarmouth with her mother, father and 4 other siblings. At the age of 55, both Lorena's parents had died, and the only significant other around was her brother Edgar, but he rejected her, assuming she was a lunatic, forcing her into Great Yarmouth's workhouse. Lorena was muted as an individual because women in the Victorian era were pushed aside within society, kept far away from the public sphere, argued by Lina Bram, Professor of Modern History. In a special detectives documentary of Antiques Roadshow, presenter Fiona Bruce, specialist Paul Attenborough and curator of Norwich Castle Museum, Ruth Bearwood, explore Lorena's story.
To me, Lorena's situation is very reflective of how women were treated in the 19th century. Be, in effect, locked up, incarcerated in an institution like this.
Society simply gave up on Lorena, creating a macro organisational barrier between the beliefs of society and their disregard for Lorena. Once inside the workhouse, the 14-foot embroidery was born. The emotions Lorena felt towards her brother and the people around her became apparent. Lorena started to stitch in anger. She used capital letters to stitch her deep cry for help, and the lack of no punctuation anchors the emotion of resentment. Was she gatekeeping her feelings by not speaking to anyone? Did she keep everything hidden from speech so that the stitching could talk for her? Without the use of embroidery, how would Lorena have channeled her emotions? Maybe by protesting her sanity. And Andrea M. Heckman, author of Woven Stories, said she used the aid of cloth to be the drawing board, the visual shout of injustice. Was Lorena's quality of life compromised because of the barriers set by society? The semantic barriers within the embroidery were caused by Lorena's flow of thoughts constantly changing. Was she encoding a depressive plea for her basic human rights, safety and security? The piece Lorena created was very personal and reveals elements of her potential lost identity. From losing her mother shortly before entering the workhouse, one will never know how much that affected her mental health. The voice of Lorena was heard through stitch. Physiologist Dr. Victoria Tissell from London College of Fashion suggests
subverted that for her own means and used it as a mode of catharsis with this venting and ranting and raving.
Lorena's life was never given justice. It's only today that we can shed light onto the experiences she went through and how stitching was her coping mechanism.
But those samplers are now her legacy. They're her heirloom to us.
Can embroidery be used as a barrier between retelling a story that impacted one's identity with having to completely relive it again? Esther Nasanta was born in 1927 in Mizek, Poland. She lived with her mother, father, 3 younger sisters and her brother. Up until the start of World War II, Esther and her family lived a normal Jewish life. It wasn't until Esther was 60 that she was able to retell the stories through stitch of her life during the Holocaust.
She shows horrendous detail, things that you really don't want to know. The cabbages that are in a field that's built on the ashes of the Jews. I think her need was every single bit of this has to be confronted. We can't turn away from it.
Esther stitches in detail the terrors her family were forced into, and during the time of Esther's escape, she could not vocalise anything. Although she kept the story hidden from speech, she used the art form of embroidery to give herself emotional distance by not speaking about the experiences, but using stitch as her voice instead. It's almost like she passed the emotions and memories onto the fabric, stitching the bad thoughts away from herself and into the cloth.
It was documentary to her. To us, it was art.
How much pain would you physically go through to show your significant others you loved them? Would it even be the behaviour of your true self? Or would the embroidery you use be for your satisfaction? David Cata was born in 1988 in Vivero, Spain. David takes the inspiration for his work from his significant others and role models, and using his own hand as his canvas, he has created a collection titled Under the Skin. Each portrait embroidery takes up to 4 hours to create. Each individual is represented as an icon of their true personality by the coloured thread David chooses to stitch them with. In an article written by Professor Samantha of Sociology, David said, "It is essential for me that the portraits are sewn on the palm of my hand, because this represents the link I have with these people." This level of internalisation within the relationship between David and his significant others shows that their lives have been physically interwoven with his. Once David has stitched the face, he then documents the removing of the stitches, pulling them out, leaving the remains of plucked skin in the shape of the familiar face. David comments that physical pain is not a boundary. The palm regenerates, leaving a performance scar, a suggestion that he has made a sincere gesture for the love he feels for his significant others, but in a very cynical, disturbing way. The videos that David publishes contain no speech. His voice is silenced and the entire focus is based on his embroidered hand. Author of USA 1000, Sasa Brown, suggests David's work is highly personal, an intimate means of communication. But surely there's a less painful way to illustrate care and compassion. Is it the documenting process of the embroidery that suggests there may be a hidden agenda to David's work? Lorena and Esther used embroidery as a medium because the emotions connected with their work were too upsetting to talk about, so stitching created a barrier between having to relive the experience again. They used embroidery to talk for them when they didn't have the voice to be heard. In comparison, David uses a form of embroidery for a personal autobiographical medium to which he physically embeds the memories made with his significant others onto his skin. In questioning these 3 case studies, it seems as though society is becoming more dependent on other mediums of communication rather than speech alone. Posting your deepest, darkest thoughts on social media before actually confronting them yourself seems to be more common. Will we ever be able to talk about our true feelings through the medium of speech? Or do we need to reveal our inner thoughts and feelings in some other form of communication? Researchers at Harvard University found that the act of disclosing information about ourselves activates the same sensation of pleasure in the brain that we get from eating food, receiving money or having sex, indicating that our brain considers self-disclosure to be rewarding, revealed in an article by Dr. Gillian Jay, digital behavioural scientist. Have you ever wanted to say something, but you've written it down instead? Maybe this is why. You prefer the reward of non-verbal communication, just like the 3 artists.